The morning sun was spilling gold across my apartment, painting the walls in a glow that made the dark espresso on my counter look almost romantic. I smoothed my silk blouse over my shoulders, noting the tiny snag near the cuff, and shook my head. Of all mornings, why today? My phone buzzed again on the marble countertop, the vibration sharp and insistent. I picked it up. The screen lit up with a single name, Margaret Whitman. My in-laws. My stomach sank like a stone in icy water. It had been years since I'd let them touch my life, yet somehow, they still had a way of sneaking back in, if only through a message. Olivia, we need to talk. It's about the inheritance. I set the phone down slowly, letting the words settle. $177 million. That number still made my head spin, but it wasn't the money I felt for in that moment. It was the betrayal, sharp and unyielding. The memory of their smug smiles, of that phrase echoing in my ears. Asterisk, she deserves that. Asterisk, the words that had stolen not just my inheritance, but my sense of family, replayed like a wound refusing to scab. I took a deep breath, feeling the smooth fabric of my blouse beneath my fingers, the faint hum of the city below.
Calm.
Collected.
Composed.
That's who I am now. But the past has a way of barging in, uninvited, and today it had come for me. I remember that day as clearly as I remember the feel of the silk blouse this morning, though back then, I wore hand-me-down sweaters that smelled faintly of mothballs and disappointment. I was 24, fresh out of college, brimming with naive hope that my family, or at least my in-laws, might see me as more than a temporary guest in their lives. Instead, I was met with cold smiles and sharper words. Margaret and her husband, Richard Whitman, sat across from me in their immaculately decorated living room, the leather couch too polished to be comfortable, the chandelier casting shadows like silent witnesses. "You really think this inheritance is for you?" Margaret asked, her tone saccharine but cutting. "Olivia, it's been decided. Our daughter deserves it. She's been waiting her whole life." I felt my chest tighten, my hands trembling on my lap. I wanted to scream that it was my birthright, that I had worked just as hard, that no one had the right to decide my worth. But the lump in my throat kept my voice hostage. Richard shook his head, feigning sympathy, but his eyes were sharp and unyielding. "Sometimes life just isn't fair, Olivia. You'll understand eventually." I wanted to bolt, run out, and never look back. But before I could, my grandmother's words echoed in my mind, a small, leather-bound journal she had pressed into my hands months before. "They may take what is yours, Olivia, but they can never take what you build with your own hands. That is untouchable." The journal had been a gift, simple yet profound, and the words inside became my shield. That night, I packed a single suitcase, my dignity folded neatly on top, and left the house that had never truly felt like mine. I felt fear, yes, but also a strange, liberating clarity. If they wanted to steal what was tangible, I would make them irrelevant in the world I was about to create for myself. It was the first step toward independence, the first moment I realized that my life, my real life, was something I had to claim, brick by brick, with my own hands. And I would. I didn't have much when I left their mansion that night, but I had something infinitely more valuable: determination and the little journal my grandmother had given me. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in downtown Chicago, the rent barely manageable, the walls thin enough that I could hear my neighbors arguing over trivialities that now seemed like luxuries compared to the battles I had fought in my own family. I found work as an assistant at a small investment firm, learning quickly, asking questions I was told were too advanced, and staying late after everyone else had gone home. It was exhausting, humbling, and terrifying. Every time I doubted myself, I opened that journal and read her words aloud in the quiet of my room. "They can't touch what you build." It was there I met Jonathan Pierce, a senior strategist at the firm, who saw something in me that even I sometimes doubted. He offered guidance, encouraged me to pursue my instincts, and most importantly, believed in my ability to grow wealth, not just manage it. His mentorship was the spark I needed, though I kept my ambitions private, never mentioning family or inheritance. I wasn't ready for anyone to know. Late nights blurred into early mornings as I learned, stumbled, and learned again. I made mistakes, costly ones, but each one was a stepping stone. My first breakthrough came with a small client who trusted me with a modest portfolio. I doubled it in under a year, gaining confidence and quiet respect. The next client was larger, the next even more significant. Each success built the foundation of the empire I would someday claim openly, but for now, it was mine alone, a secret garden they could never trample. Along the way, I celebrated small victories in private. The smell of fresh coffee while reviewing contracts at 6 a.m., the sight of my reflection smiling back from a polished glass office window, the faint clink of a key turning in the lock of my first apartment I could truly call mine. Each moment reminded me that my success was self-made, untethered from the hands that once tried to steal it. By the time I turned 30, I had quietly accumulated wealth, purchased stakes in multiple ventures, and even acquired my own firm. I remained publicly modest, letting social media posts hint at accomplishment without revealing the full extent. I had become powerful, yes, but I had also become invisible to those who had once dismissed me. And that invisibility was my shield, my revenge in waiting. I could almost feel the old sting fading, replaced by a simmering, quiet pride. They had taken everything tangible, but they could not touch the life I had built from nothing, an empire forged in secrecy, patience, and unshakable resolve. The doorbell rang sharply, cutting through the calm hum of my downtown loft. I had expected this moment for years, though I hadn't allowed myself to imagine it fully. Margaret and Richard Whitman, standing on my threshold, brimming with that same false charm, expecting to see the timid, struggling woman they once dismissed. I opened the door, and their eyes widened almost immediately. They took in my surroundings, the sleek, modern furniture I'd chosen with care, the walls lined with abstract art I had commissioned, the soft lighting that made the space feel expansive yet intimate. My awards, modestly displayed but unmistakable, hinted at the life I had built. Their glances darted to the framed photo of me at a conference, microphone in hand, addressing hundreds of people who had come to hear me speak. "Olivia," Margaret began, but the voice faltered. I stepped aside, gesturing them in. "Please have a seat," I said, my voice calm, smooth, but with an undercurrent of power that had been absent in our first encounters. I watched them sink onto the couch, stiff, unsure. I could see the gears turning behind their eyes, confusion, disbelief, shame, but also the faint trace of regret they had never quite confronted before. I poured us each a glass of water, hearing the soft click of ice against glass, and waited. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until it became almost unbearable. And then I spoke, letting the truth land slowly, like a stone dropped into still water. "You remember that inheritance," I said. Margaret flinched, Richard's jaw tightened. "The $177 million that was supposed to be mine, but which you decided to give to your daughter instead?" I watched them shift uncomfortably, unable to meet my eyes. "It's funny," I continued, "how you believed taking it would diminish me, how you thought it would define my life, or ruin it. But I built something you could never take away. I have my own firm now, multiple investments, and a net worth that makes the inheritance look like pocket change." Their expressions were priceless. Margaret's lips parted, searching for words that wouldn't come. Richard's hands clenched into fists in his lap. I let the pause stretch, giving them time to absorb it. I let them feel the weight of years of underestimation. Everything you assumed about me wrong. Every dismissal, every slight, every smug smile, irrelevant now. I'm not the same woman you tried to control. They sat, stunned, as I slowly walked them through the offices, showing them a glimpse of the empire I had quietly built from nothing. Their daughter, the so-called deserving one, had inherited nothing from me. And yet, here I stood, calm and composed, proving that their judgment had been as flawed as their morality. In that moment, the power had shifted. The whispers of past betrayal were drowned out by the undeniable truth. I had not just survived. I had thrived, untouchable and unbowed. The room felt smaller now, though nothing had changed physically. Everything had shifted in that moment of revelation. The balance of power, the expectations, the unspoken rules. I could see the panic flicker in Margaret's eyes and the rigid tension in Richard's shoulders. For years, they had held the cards, dictating who deserved what, believing they could shape my life with a few words. But now, the game had changed. I poured myself another glass of water, letting the cool liquid remind me to stay composed. "You took what you thought was mine," I said, looking them both directly in the eye. "But you cannot take who I am, what I built, what I've earned." They didn't interrupt. They couldn't. I continued, calmly but firmly. "I'm willing to help, but on my terms. And make no mistake, these terms are non-negotiable." I listed them one by one. Accountability. They must acknowledge the decisions they made that were unfair, that harmed me and others, without excuses or justifications. Growth. They must pursue something meaningful beyond appearances and wealth, passion, purpose, contribution. No more blind entitlement. Boundaries. Their daughter cannot inherit anything that was stolen from me. If they want to rebuild relationships, it must be free of favoritism and deception. Self-reflection. They must engage with a mentor, counselor, or some form of guidance to truly understand the impact of their actions. I watched them absorb each condition, their faces shifting between shame, disbelief, and a glimmer of understanding. I could feel my own heart steady as I spoke. This was not vengeance, it was justice. Not cruelty, but empowerment. I was extending a hand, but only to those willing to lift themselves honestly, not by trampling someone else's life. "Understand this," I said, my tone softening slightly, but remaining unwavering. "I care enough to give a second chance, but I will not bend for old patterns. I will not apologize for surviving. I will not be diminished to make anyone comfortable. And I will protect what is mine, my life, my legacy, my self-respect." There was silence. Margaret's shoulders sagged, Richard's jaw unclenched slightly. They were listening, really listening, for perhaps the first time. And I felt a strange warmth, not pride in money or revenge, but in the fact that I could shape the terms of my own life and offer them a choice, even after everything. I poured the rest of the water into my glass and lifted it lightly. "This is your chance. Take it seriously or walk away. Either way, I remain who I've always been, the woman you underestimated. And that will never change." They nodded, hesitant but attentive, knowing the old dynamics had been broken and that I now stood entirely on my own terms. Weeks passed after that confrontation, and I watched quietly as small changes began to take root. Margaret signed up for a leadership course, something beyond the shallow social events she'd obsessed over. Richard started volunteering at a local nonprofit, finally learning to measure worth beyond bank statements. Their daughter, once coddled by entitlement, began earning her own achievements, independent of the inheritance that had caused so much pain. I observed all this from the comfort of my office, sunlight streaming across the polished mahogany desk where my grandmother's journal lay open. I touched the leather cover gently, a small smile tugging at my lips. Her words, written in fading ink, had carried me through years of self-doubt, betrayal, and struggle. They can never take what you build with your own hands. How true they had been. I reflected on the woman I had been, the frightened, uncertain girl sitting across from Margaret and Richard all those years ago. And I thought of the woman I had become, resilient, accomplished, untouchable not because of wealth alone, but because of patience, courage, and the refusal to let others define my worth. Life had a strange way of balancing itself. I had gained far more than an inheritance I'd been denied. I had earned self-respect, autonomy, and clarity. And while some wounds would always whisper, they no longer dictated the story of my life. I was the author now. That evening, I walked to the window of my loft and looked out over the city, lights twinkling like distant stars. The hum of traffic below, the smell of brewing coffee from a nearby cafe, the faint chill of autumn air brushing my skin, it all felt like a promise. A life reclaimed, a future shaped entirely by me. I picked up the journal once more and traced the embossed letters on the cover. The small, steadfast guidance from years ago had become a compass, a testament that true power and fulfillment are built, not given. I took a deep breath and whispered softly to myself, as if leaving a message for the younger Olivia who had once trembled at their door. I am whole, I am strong, and I am finally free.